Welcome to the launch of our Major Projects Leadership Forum Reform Agenda and Roadmap. We're delighted that you can join us this afternoon. I'm Professor Jennifer White, and I'm Director of the John Grill Institute for Project Leadership. And I want to start by recognising and paying respect to the elders and communities, past, present and emerging, of the lands that the University of Sydney's campuses stand on. For thousands of years, they've shared and exchanged knowledges across innumerable generations for the benefit of all. We're on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here at the University of Sydney. And so our agenda for today, I will do a little bit of introduction. Myself and Peter will then talk about the Major Projects Leadership Forum, Reform Agenda and Roadmap. And we'll move then quite quickly into our discussion with the great panellists that we've put together to talk about what this means for major projects. And I'm really excited to have panellists from projects that I've observed and admired, and to think about what is it that we can do to take the sector forward, given that no project is perfect. We all need to embrace the challenges, the problems that exist on projects and how to overcome them, and the changes that occur during delivery and how we think about that and move our sector forward. We'll have time for Q&A, and I'm really keen that we get that opportunity to ask questions, and then we will close and put together and put forward our call to action. We want you to come with us on this journey. So the aim is to work together to transform the sector. So to welcome you from the John Grill Institute for Project Leadership, and just say a couple of words about what we do and why this is important to us. So we're set up with this mission to improve project leadership in Australia and internationally. And I really see the work that we do as being about a flywheel. So bringing together research, the knowledge and impact that comes out of research, exec ed, and also engagement with industry, policy, government, to shape then our research agendas and to transform the sector. And I think it's really important when we're looking at improving the sector to think about how we might connect government, policy, industry, and research. If we want to move from being a low technology, conflictual sector to a high-tech, collaborative sector, then that suggests a different relationship between those parties and a relationship with the research base. So in the Institute, we are interested in practice-informed research, particularly around around project leadership in a changing world. And we know that our world is challenged by new technologies, things like AI. And so we do work on project models and digital transformation. We know that there are challenges around projects in terms of the wider number of communities and individuals that projects now engage with externally, as well as the formal stakeholders of the project. And so we do work on the organizational dynamics of projects. And we do work on projects for sustainable, resilient and just futures. We also are interested in executive leadership in major projects. And we do education around project leadership, complex projects, project sponsorship. I do a course on systems engineering leadership. So we're interested in projects as interventions into communities and places. So I wanted to set that context because it's really that connection that we want to make, and that work that we want to do around transforming the sector. And my experience of doing that kind of work in the past, and that 20 years of work looking at major projects, that sets the context for why we were interested to work with the Australian Constructors Association and Consult Australia to put together and launch a major projects leadership forum. And we ran the first event in February, and we brought together senior leaders to discuss how we can transform and take forward the sector around these three themes of productivity, collaboration, and outcomes. And I want to hand over to Peter Colacino, who's been really part of that journey, just to say a little bit more about that forum and the themes and how we're thinking about taking them forward before we get into the panel discussion. So Peter, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jennifer. And as Jennifer's mentioned, this forum in February earlier this year was an opportunity for the Institute, the Australian Constructors Association, as well as Consult Australia and their members to come together in a roundtable of over 50 leaders from across government, industry, contractor, consultant, but financier, advisor, and others, as well as embedding academia within the discussion, which is still a relatively novel concept in Australia, or certainly in the major projects industry. But the involvement of academia is incredibly important. It provides a catalyst to fill knowledge gaps, to address data gaps and restraints or constraints, and also to drive innovation beyond what's capable in a project environment. As Jennifer mentioned, these elements are critical to move from a low-tech, low-cost industry to the type of high-tech, high-value industry that we all aspire to be. The roundtable was an opportunity to both rally around the need for change, something that we hear often day to day, as well as in many forums, but also genuinely and frankly to explore the opportunities to deliver meaningful progress. And these three themes were selected. Productivity, shifting the focus from productivity on-site to efficiency of service provision. Collaboration and engendering the behaviours to increase the likelihood of success. And finally, outcomes, measuring and reporting on social value, shifting the paradigm from concrete and steel to thinking about the services that assets and indeed projects provide for communities. Within each of those three themes, a series of three priority recommendations were identified. Under the banner of outcomes, developing best practice to build a focus on major project resilience and evolving thinking beyond risk, measuring intangibles about resetting the time, cost, quality paradigm to a new provide, service efficiency and social outcome paradigm. Telling the story, shifting the notion of project postmortems to embrace narrative-based storytelling, understanding that successes and failures should be free from blame and shared widely to avoid repetition. While under productivity, a focus on service delivery, major projects, sector productivity should be defined to recognise the role of physical and digital assets in offering value for money services. Providing pipeline clarity from early concept planning through operation and maintenance through to eventual decommissioning, allowing resources to be better targeted to project delivery. As well as a focus on procurement, tailoring measures of productivity to evaluate cost and to provide government outcomes against alternative approaches. And finally, a focus on collaboration with recommendations around cultural shift, promoting and embracing a cultural shift to define, measure and build trust in project delivery, including a flatter, more open and democratic project structure, project leadership, tailoring projects and project leader training and education to the development of collaborative skills, and finally, transparency and accountability, creating a no surprises culture where project operating models and contract frameworks focus on embedding that no surprises approach, ensuring that there's a confident relationship between client and contractor. Beyond each of these priority recommendations, a lily pad or a pathway of up to 30 sequenced actions have been defined under each of the 3 themes. They focus on a strategic approach, improved governance, common definitions, enablers, and change management. And you can scan the QR code on your screen in order to access the full report and the list of recommendations. And you can scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen in order to sign on to the reform pathway. I'm sure after the discussion with the panellists, you'll all share mine and Jennifer's enthusiasm for the change program. Back to you, Jennifer, and back to the panel.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm going to move us into the panel session, and this is really an opportunity to explore with people who are at the, in the hot seat leading some of these major projects, some of these issues and some of these challenges and how we might start to think about addressing them. And really, Graeme, Tim and David, I'm really keen to kind of get your advice and your thinking as we start to think then about the way that we take this forward into our working groups and into our programme of work to help support the sector move forward. Now, I wonder if maybe I can just ask you to quickly introduce the projects and the context that you work in. So, Graeme, perhaps I can go first to you, and you can just say a few introductory words about where you work.
Thanks, Jennifer. Look, great to be with the panel, and great to be working with you guys. I mean, having heard the background around what John Grill's up to, it's really interesting. It's something I'm sort of quite passionate about. The project I'm working on is Cross River Rail in Brisbane, and essentially we've got a very large river in Brisbane that just creates a pretty significant barrier to the middle of our rail network, and we've only got one major crossing. So putting a tunnel under the river to provide a grade separated connection in the system essentially unblocks that sort of core bottleneck. Got 4 underground stations as well as the tunnel, but we're also doing 8 surface stations and a whole range of stabling yards. So what it's all about is enabling the network to be more efficient, but also enabling the South East Queensland rail network to move to that 3-sector style and allow growth onto the system. And having witnessed Sydney's recent opening, I'm now more inspired than ever, because we're heading towards this very painful stage of testing and commissioning and putting trains in tunnels and so forth. And everybody I talk to points to me and says that is the most difficult element, but by all means focus and you'll get there in the end. So I see Tim doing an air punch, having been there before. So that's enough about our project. Happy to talk about more of it along the way. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Graeme. So Tim, maybe I hand to you to introduce what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I think I can't resist to say what I was doing before I say what I am doing. So what I was doing was head of projects for Sydney Metro. I did that from 2015 through to the beginning of this year. We did open yesterday, and Graeme, it is painful, stressful, and my word, when you open, how good is it? So all the pain, put up with it, because it opened yesterday. It's been fantastic, and you'd be surprised. My quote on Sydney Metro is, Sydney doesn't know what it's bought. It now understands what it's bought, and they're a very, very happy bunch of people in Sydney. What I'm doing now is I am now working on high-speed rail. So my role is to head up the new high-speed rail authority. Our mandate is to develop high-speed rail for the east coast of Australia. The first stage of that will be to produce a business case for the section between Newcastle and Sydney. The business case has to be complete this year, along with a product definition report, which will be an overview. We have the benefit of picking up on a lot of experience from previous studies, and currently, fingers crossed, we're on target to get the government a report by the end of the year. So I'm very interested in this conversation to deliver these mega projects. I think we've got a great opportunity of doing things better in the future.
Thanks, Tim. David.
Thanks, Jennifer. So thank you everybody for having me on this panel. So look, I'm feeling a bit like I'm the secondary, one of these eminent people I'm on the panel with, but we're not delivering a rail job, we're delivering an energy job. So there are a lot of tunnels involved for us as well. And we're also at the very beginning of our journey. So we're doing pumped hydro, and I'm sure you all know what pumped hydro is. So it's the battery storage that feeds into the grid, and as we say in our adverts, if you've seen them, that's what happens when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and obviously the coal-fired power stations aren't burning. We've got a very big job ahead of us. Not only are we still waiting to get our environmental approvals, there's a lot of things that we're working on with the exploratory works. We building massive caverns underground. I mean, one of the caverns 280 by 60 by 80 meters long. Sorry, I'm just getting numbers in my head. So there's a lot of work that we need to do. There's a massive amount of interaction and engagement with the contracting world and with other stakeholders that we have. And again, we're really at the beginning of that journey at the moment. We've got quite a few packages in the market right now. And what we've been really focusing on is working out how best we can deliver this. We understand there's constraints in the market with other projects that have come into play. We are in competition with some massive infrastructure developments, and it's what can we offer to make our project attractive to make sure that we can deliver collaboratively. So my role is I'm looking after commercial for the jobs, and that includes procurement, which is obviously at the front of my mind at the moment, but then all the other things about how we then go on and deliver and contractually work with our partners in making sure that the next 5 to 10 years are a success for us.
Thank you. I mean, I'm sure everyone on the call understands what an amazing panel we've got. So we've got projects at different stages of delivery. We've got different sectors, and I think learning from transport into energy is a real opportunity, given the volume of energy projects and water projects that we have growing in Australia. So I want to get into the discussion, and I want just to say to people on the call that if you have questions as we go through, please do put them in the Q&A. And so we have the Q&A button at the bottom. If you put your questions in, you can thumb questions up and down, and I will try and get questions to the panelists as we go. But I want to start on the topic of productivity. So when we were developing our understanding on productivity in the Major Projects Leadership Forum, there was a desire to get beyond what got called bricklayer productivity. And I wanted to ask you how we should be thinking about productivity in these large programs of work. Should we be thinking in terms of efficiency of service delivery or what's on site? How do you think about productivity? And maybe Graeme, I can start with you on this.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, productivity. I mean, it's a massive issue for the sector. If you look at the data, it's basically showing that productivity hasn't improved in the sector for quite a few years. In fact, it's probably going backwards at the moment, and costs are going up, and hours of work and productive output is less. And I mean, it's pretty sharp at the moment for us. We're dealing with protected industrial action on our site, and we've seen productivity drop through the floor. I guess with productivity, there's so many aspects to it. I mean, there's the labour elements that I talk about there, but there's also procurement, which is the stuff that David's dealing with, and how can you be efficient in that procurement space, but also in decision making. I'm in the stage where we're up to with the project that Tim was alluding to before, which is all about the paper railway, the assurance, the validation. I mean, talking to colleagues Sydney and Melbourne and in London with Crossrail, the time and productivity loss in relation to the assurance documentation that you need to have in place for a railway, an underground railway, is just next level because of the safety elements that are involved, way beyond a road type of project. So these mega projects have many aspects of productivity that you can look into, and I think as a sector, it's how do you build it as efficiently as possible? How do you procure it? How do you procure it? How do you build it as efficiently as possible? Even to subcontractors. I mean, we're seeing subcontractors are apprehensive to take on risk at the moment for fear of insolvency. So they're building in greater levels of protection for themselves as subcontractors, and then that trickles through. So I think this at the procurement level, we've always talked about that. In delivery, there's been a lot of focus around delivery, and depending on what the back end of the project is around assurance and validation to get those approvals and acceptance across the line. So I don't know that I'm really answering the question. What I'm sort of saying is there's a lot to it, and I think what we need to do is break it down to chunks. One thing I've sort of learned from these mega projects I've been involved in is the sustainability to maintain productivity throughout the life cycle of a project is really difficult. You need to get momentum into the project. Then what ends up happening is people feel a posture to action. With action is the desire to sort of get that productivity. If you get the right people into the right areas, then they feel empowered and they can get on with the decision making. And I guess that's what it really comes down to, is the ability for people to efficiently make decisions with the right amount of information in front of them, and the decisions are made at the right time when the project needs it. And having been smashed by COVID, like a lot of the other projects, having had cyclones and floods, you've just got to be prepared that you're not going to maintain maximum levels of productivity throughout the life of the project. It's sustainability and sustained productivity.
Thanks, Graeme. There's a lot in that answer. Tim or David, do you want to add anything to that, or shall I move us on to the next question? I mean, maybe I'll move us on. So the next question I have is around, Australia's been a major leader in the delivery of major projects. Over the last number of years, the number of major projects in Australia has significantly increased. And noting that recent activity in the major project sector, why has Australia not got more productive? What's holding us back on productivity? And maybe Tim, if I could ask you,
I think there's a great expression, isn't it? It's from Albert Einstein. Insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. And I think that's where the construction industry is. We are reluctant to change. So there is plenty of advice from various learned places like yourself and others about how to increase productivity. And we talk about it, but we don't do it. So I think when you actually stand and look at our work sites, you compare it to some of what's happening overseas, we have a lack of modularity, building things off site. I come from the rail sector. I talk about possession work, which is pouring concrete in the rain with a torch. It's not a very productive or safe environment, but they resist building things off site and assembling them on site. We also commercially, I think David's point's right. You've got to get the commercial model to be right. We have a habit of never having the same contract on two jobs. So you look around, we don't really have a standard Australian contract. People talk about GC21 being a standard contract. GC21 starts off as a standard, and then you add the special clauses, which are slightly, almost 3 or 4 times the size of the original contract. So we've got to get better at standardizing what we're doing. I think from us, productivity, it's the old thing, you've got to invest to get something. I think the construction industry is one of the lowest investors in R&D and innovation. And that's probably a more holistic problem, in that the margins are so low, they have limited opportunity to actually invest. So I think that the two go together. I also think that we do have a habit, and this is something, probably a federation issue, but Graham's doing a project in Queensland, a rail project. I'm doing one in New South Wales. There's our colleagues in Victoria doing one. I can guarantee there's not 3 specs that are the same for the same thing. They may look the same, but there'll be little quirky things that are different. So again, it's not helping industry. So I think the reality is there's a lot of opportunity, but unless we want to completely be insane, we've actually got to start changing what we do and how we do it. And it probably starts with the client, not just the contractors.
Okay, so what can the client do to improve productivity? I don't know, David, if you've got some thoughts.
Absolutely, Jennifer. So I think from our side as a client, we need to change and we need to invest in change. So as a client, we need to lean into this process. It's communication needs to be clear. We need to have the mutual collaborative requirement to fix issues as they arise, not just let them sort of go off into the never never and then we catch up when they're bigger and nastier. It's also no longer about shelving risk and passing it over to the contractor. You know, we need to pursue, I think as Graeme and Tim said, to pursue models that support and incentivize innovation and productivity improvement. It's traditionally in this market we're very quick to put damages or like liquidate damages, whatever, as a tool when things like productivity slip, when delays are encountered or targets are missed. But these have pretty limited impact and actually drive behaviors that more often than not have the opposite effect of what we're trying to achieve. Was early notification, working through issues, trying to get to that common goal of closing these matters out before, as they become known. This sort of can clear the way for these improvements and performance enhancement, and that's what we're trying to do at Queensland Queensland Hydro. We're trying to do something differently. We're using NEC4 contract. It's obviously it's just a way of doing things, but we're trying to get it to drive different behaviors. You know, it's how we deal with the issues that arise on a mega project like this that dictates the degree of impact. And it's driven by us. You know, we choose the platform, how we are going to behave, and what sort of culture we bring into the project, the program, is what drives things forward. So using NEC, for instance, and the early warning regime that it has, there's so many factors that could derail the delivery of the works. But if we know these issues as they arise, instead of waiting for some aggregated claims hit our desk in a few months' time and the secondary program going off in the background, just going on a different tangent, if we wait for that, it's too late to fix. And then by that stage, productivity has gone down the drain. It's the issue becomes a commercial legal discussion as opposed to how do we fix it, and then let's worry about who gets recompensed for it. And our paths are diverged. So that to me is what we need to focus on. Get in there, let's change how we operate, and that comes from the client. We have to drive that behavior.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's interesting how we start talking about productivity and we very quickly start talking about commercial and contractual arrangements, and also then how you incentivize collaboration. And I might bring us on to that set of issues around collaboration, and I'm sure we'll circle back to some of the things that we've just been talking about. And I wonder how you create an environment that that brings good faith to collaboration. Yeah, we all think collaboration is important, that having a less conflictual set of relationships in this sector, trying to create those relationships that really drive forward productivity and incentivize people in the right way. I wonder if there's some thoughts on how we create that trust that's central to this collaborative process.
I might jump in there. Look, I think there's a real need to sort of get a common goal as to what we're trying to achieve. If there's an emotional and psychological attachment to the outcome, regardless of where you sit in the project, whether you're on the contractor side, the subcontractor side, or the owner side, or even the sponsor, if there's a really clear understanding of what we're looking to try and achieve, then I think you start to get that alignment. And then it's, we've all been involved in contracts that have performed quite effectively, and a lot of that comes down to individuals who are prepared to sort of sign up to the outcome and be committed to that outcome, recognise each other's commercial position and the ability to try and work through those commercial positions, but the end outcome is the challenge. So getting that sort of cultural collaboration, getting that buy-in, and it's a lot easier when you're doing a project that's for the public good, that there's a higher purpose than the individual commercial outcome that usually comes to bear. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to communication, effective communication, and information sharing where you're actually working on the same page. So in our case, we picked up a lot of knowledge from London and Crossrail. We moved to an integrated project schedule because we've got 3 main contracts that could potentially be in tension with each other, and trying to have transparency about what are those common goals that we're trying to achieve in each one of them, and not make them a baton handover type one. We make them as a common goal that we will all celebrate when we get to there. And of course, we put incentives around that, but trying to set it up so that we're driving the right behaviours culturally. I'd like to say we're there. We're not there yet. We've still got a little way to go, but I guess that's the intent of where we're at. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, David, could perhaps I could bring you in and you know, what's the value of getting these kind of processes right at the beginning?
Well, I think, Jennifer, if you don't get them right at the beginning, it's really difficult to catch up. I mean, it's a hard job to stop. Use the train, sorry. Stop the train, get off, and reset the direction, because, you know, when you do that wholesale stop and reset, that costs time, it costs money. You've lost a lot of trust already. So getting that culture right in the beginning, I think, is vital. You know, so saying we're going to be collaborative is great, but what does it mean? Yeah, so that's with Queensland Hydro, and as I said, we're at the beginning of the journey, but we've spent probably about a year engaging with the market, engaging with major contractors, tier ones, all the way down to mum and dads in the local area. So what does it mean to you? What does this project mean to you? We're saying collaborative. These are the things that we're promising we're going to do. How are we going to operate? But we want you to come along on that journey with us. You know, we want to understand your drivers. We understand the requirements, positions. We want to know that we are saying we're going to do it in a way that is more collaborative. It's not your traditional, you know, lump all the risk on you, but we expect that collaboration is a two-way journey. Setting that up from the very beginning and understanding that the partners that we choose are going to be the ones that come on that journey with us helps us to formulate our procurement. It helps us to set our transaction and our delivery strategies. So getting those right at the very beginning will allow us to move forward in that sort of manners. We rely on our delivery partners because they're the experts. They're the ones that are actually going to be putting the tools into operation, digging tunnels, building the dams for us. We're not going to be doing that. We sort of setting the strategy and then relying on their expertise. That's why we employ them. But it's getting that culture right at the very beginning allows us to move forward along that path. If we don't set it up correctly from the start, we don't have the foundation to move forward. We need to get everyone's heads in agreement, and then we can go down a path of making sure as we go through the selection process that we have got the partners that are doing that and allows us to move forward. So we don't have to reset and change.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to want to ask one last question on collaboration, and then move us on to outcomes, and then get us into the Q&A, because I can see lots of interesting questions coming through in the Q&A. But Tim, I just wanted to ask about collaboration and innovation. So you were talking about, you know, modularity and new forms of construction. Do you think can collaboration help to bring innovation to the sector?
Look, I think the point that David and Graeme made are right. It's you have to have a willingness. I've come off projects where you've heard through the backstory that the contractor won't put innovations up because he doesn't expect them to be accepted, or it just diverts them because the client takes forever to make a decision. On a recent project, a previous project, Northwest, the project director said, if you put an idea up, I'll get a response to you within 2 weeks. And this was a die-hard contractor who said, I'll believe it when I see it. And it wasn't so much whether the innovation was accepted, it was the timeliness of a response. And that made a huge difference. So there was genuine innovation happening, but they couldn't wait. They didn't want to wait for 3 months while it was evaluated and all the rest of it. And so that made a huge difference. And I think what I've seen in a lot of our recent contracts, we've walked away from being, I guess, a good client. You know, you look at response time for design submissions. There used to be 14 days, you'll get a response. Now you'll get a response in a reasonable period, and it's brilliantly worded by our lawyers. So we're never late. We're never on time. We're just whenever. So I think collaboration is about understanding what's driving yourself to deliver the project, but also what drives the contractor. What is the behavior he's looking for? I think can make a huge difference. I fully endorse what David's saying and what Graeme's saying. Think about how you work and have the honest conversations. Invariably, culture is the king to this. It is about a collaborative culture. And quite honestly, if there's people that can't come up to their game, let them go. Don't put them part of your project. You want people that can have honest conversations. But as a client, you've got to understand what does it mean for the contractor. And quite honestly, equally, contractors have to understand that we are, especially in government projects, we're looking after taxpayers' money, and we have an absolute responsibility to do that wisely and fairly. And I think that's the key, is wisely and fairly. And so don't be silly with your claims, because quite honestly, a well put together claim gets resolved far, far quicker than an outrageous claim, which you then spend months arguing about, and it's a third of the cost and half the time that it was originally. So I think it's about both sides working together in a much more open environment.
Okay, I'm going to move us on to outcomes for, and then I'm going to get us into our questions. So, how do we make sure we don't lose sight of the outcomes that projects are looking to deliver, and how do we keep that focus on outcomes rather than cost? Tim, maybe I can ask you to kind of pick that up and then throw it.
Yeah, so I'll start. I think a government project is not just about delivering a bit of infrastructure. If it was, you'd ignore all the stakeholders, pin your ears back, go for gold. A government project should give back to the community. It's got to take account of the community. There's other opportunities, training, First Nation participation, diversity. We should, at the end of a government project, not just have a piece of infrastructure, but you should have social betterment. And I think you've actually got to outline what are your requirements very clearly. What we found in the past, contractors are really, really good. They understand requirements, but you've got to tell them. Don't expect them to guess. And if it's going to cost them money to do it, pay them. But also explain to them why it's important. It's remarkable how many young construction guys have got the benefit of understanding that if they look after the local community, you know what? The local community looks after them, and it's a win-win situation. So for me, don't necessarily focus on the bottom line, focus on what is the outcome you're going to achieve. But I think, unfortunately, government has a reputation, which the contractors know, that invariably we accept the lowest price. And in some cases, we've got to be brave enough to say, no, we're not going to accept the lowest price. We're going to accept the one that gives us genuinely the best value and the best outcome.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Graeme, do you want to add to that? I mean, I know you've been thinking quite hard about how Cross River Rail, becomes part of Brisbane, and I wonder if there's something you want to say on that.
Look, I mean, a lot of it goes back to, obviously the business case in the first place, and then why we're actually doing it, what we're trying to achieve. There's actually a service requirement, but doing it in a way that outcome serves the public that we're focused on. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about accessibility, upgrades to stations and accessible networks. So this is trying to make the use of the network far more attractive to people, regardless of their accessibility needs. And it could be, a person in a wheelchair with a disability, or someone who's got eyesight issues. But it could also be the rugby player on the weekend who busted their knee and they're on crutches and they've got to struggle getting up and down the stairs. So, trying to make it more smooth, that's what it's all about. And then when you see the finished product and the people buying into that particular outcome, then that starts to create the story, which was around what the original intent was. I mean, one person who we in the sector know pretty well was Mark Wild, who was involved in Crossrail. He was very good at telling the story and telling that narrative around, what was the project, what was the project all about, and then getting people bought into that outcome, and then getting that sort of momentum in behind it, so that everybody was part of. They all owned that outcome at the end of the day. And I think that's what I like about, one of the elements there about telling the story rather than raking over the coals. The old lessons learned thing. Avoid the scapegoating or the finger pointing, or I suppose the abridged version where people, do their own interpretation of it, do it in a way in which it's a story that can be told and retold, so that people can pick up those lessons and learn from it. I mean, I keep in touch with Tim and the guys down in Sydney and also in Melbourne, to hear the version of their story, because they're 2 years ahead of where we are, and so I want to learn from their story so that we can bring it in, so we can achieve the outcomes and miss those pitfalls along the way if we can.
Yeah, and I do think there's things that international projects can learn from Australia in this space. So, I mean, having been to the Cross River Rail sort of experience centre that you've got set up, it's a very nice way of kind of engaging and telling that story. And having been out on Sydney Metro yesterday, you know, I know they'd handed out badges and people were excited about the badges on the opening and so on, and that was kind of, it's created that sense of connection. So it's interesting to learn across the different projects that are going on internationally. I want to get us to some of the questions here. So there's a question from Sam Macaulay, who I know was very involved in the innovation programme in Crossrail, but his question's on productivity. How has the way you think about productivity changed over time, and why?
I'm happy to have a go at that one. I think on Sydney Metro, we were using a traditional program. We were getting people to tell us how far they were progressed, and I'd say there was some truth in the matter. There was a few fibs. We actually then moved to a far more granular process, which is much more like manufacturing. I think one of the examples, we were talking about cable terminations. We knew we had 1,000 cable terminations. We monitored every one. We knew that we had so many communications rooms that had to be finished. We got into much higher level of granularity, which is much more of a manufacturing type process. Often in contracts, we used earned value, which doesn't actually tell you what's happening on the site. What it tells you is they've spent so much money, but doesn't necessarily relate to progress, because that could be money well spent or badly spent. So I think getting into a much more granular level of what are the production measures that are actually happening, and then comparing week for week. You know, we were saying, well, we knew that one team was getting through terminations at a colossal rate. Another team was half the rate. So we can actually really begin to drive some good outcomes and find out what's happening. So that's one of the things I think we need to rethink how we measure production on sites. And, you know, it's that whole thing, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think there's opportunities to manage things better.
There's a question here from Fatima Afzal, which is about well-being, and it strikes me that this sector has really increased safety on site. It's done a lot of work on well-being. And how do you think about well-being in relation to productivity?
Look, it's a good point, because it is a sector that that has had dramatic improvements in safety over the time. I mean, all you need to do is look at some of the footage of people who are working on the Sydney Opera House, cigarettes and no shirts and basically no other protection, to what we've got today. So yeah, definitely. I mean, the fundamentals of well-being, but still, as a sector, there's psychological issues there. And that's both on the site, but also in the office environment. There's a lot of stress. We're talking about large dollars involved and consequences as a result. So the well-being's a pretty important one. If people are fatigued, they're obviously not going to perform as best as they can. And I think it's important that we sort of do monitor, particularly these mega projects. I mean, in the past, they would be a project would last 2-3 years, and so people would come in, get in, have a bit of a break between them and move. But these projects that go on for 7, 8, 9 years, I mean, the hydro projects, David, yours is going to go, what are you talking, 10, 12 years? They're large projects where you need to get some kind of sustainability around well-being built into it.
I'm just busy trying to read down some of the other questions on collaboration. So there's a piece here around in your experience of what's your experience of collaborative working as a business discipline applied in Australia? And people are referring to contracting frameworks like NEC, and they're also referring to ISO standards. And I wonder if there are the things you think, how do you think about that as a sort of discipline, if you like, of collaboration?
Yeah, Jennifer, I might take that one. So, look, NEC4 and all the other standards and what have you, they're a tool in the toolbox. At the end of the day, you can have the best contract, which defines collaborative requirements, everything, but you need to have the people, you need to drive that culture. It really does help to have the framework, like NEC, for instance, that gives you the direction, gives you the guidance, and then puts in place the framework to actually do that, as opposed to, right, this is how we get into dispute and this is how we handle it before it gets to the courts. With NEC, for instance, it gives you the whole early warning, early notification regime. It allows you to communicate before the issues become a major problem. So I think that utilizing such tools, such frameworks, is a major step forward. I mean, we've introduced NEC4, as I said, it's the first time the NEC4 has been used on a major project like this. I know Sydney Water used it for their rollout, but for a major infrastructure project, it's a massive step forward, and our board has been kind enough to let us take it forward and give us the trust and the support to say, okay, we're going to be doing this collaboratively, we're going to be delivering differently, incentivized target cost as opposed to penalizing. We're trying to look at the models that they used, for instance, Heathrow Terminal 5. The incentivized target cost modeling. We're looking at Hinkley Site C. All those major mega projects that have used this type of arrangement, having those rules there, having those guidance notes that have been drafted and tested and measured and then tested again to support us, I think is vital if you're going to do that. If you don't have something there to refer back to rely on, you can fall very quickly back into old habits. The confrontational type of contracting, that let's hide this until we can make a claim and got enough evidence to support it. So I think it's crucial to have those tools and those frameworks in place. It just gives you that leg forward, that step forward.
Okay, I'm going to ask one final question. I'm going to merge a question from, I think Roger Swinburne and Jane McGree are asking sort of similar questions in a way, and they're asking about value. How does ESG or social value tie into questions of productivity and efficiency metrics? How do you create that outcome value in terms of ESG and social value, in this environment where we're how does that fit with the metrics that we normally have for projects?
Look, from my perspective, I think that's one of the outcomes you're trying to achieve. I think it's, I think the sustainability outcome or the social outcome you're trying to achieve should be measured in exactly the same way as other things. And again, there's good ways of doing it and there's bad ways of doing it. But I think that was the earlier point we were making about when you look at a project, it's not just about building infrastructure. It's about, can it be done sustainably? And also, one of the things about these projects is sometimes it's worth spending some money to get those outcomes, because then they can then follow on. And I know Sydney Metro, we spend a lot of time on concrete mix to get a green mix, and each project's done slightly better than the last one. So again, we're seeing a gradual improvement, but you've got to have people that are driving that, same as everything else, and people that will work with the contractors to achieve it. So I think, from my point of view, I think they are as important as the, if you like, the blunt end of the delivery, which is pouring concrete and placing steel. So I think we have to do that, because otherwise you won't have a successful project.
Yeah, thank you. So we've put these working groups together around these three areas. And so just to close out on our panel discussion, I would really like to get your advice on, what can our working groups sort of do? Where can we start to take this agenda forward and to make a difference that would be, useful and implementable to you on your current project, or on you can see your peers being able to work differently on future projects. So what would be your advice to us as we put these working groups together, they're going to meet in terms of seeking to enable change in major projects.
I might jump in. Look, I think it's a very practical sector. So and it's kind of how do you get the theory but make it very rapidly move to practice. And I think it's one of those sectors, where David was talking about what they're doing there. That's learning from other experiences. We've done something similar, and how do we take that innovation of thought, capture it, but then allow it to go through that evolution of the species. So each time it's picked up and done again. So having readily accessible feeds on how certain problems or challenges were solved under those banners that you've got, and it becomes this sort of highly accessible, where people who are trying to innovate, they need to be able to get from start to finish as quickly as possible, and have a good resource and a good referral point, and then the ability to talk about personal experiences and tap into that knowledge. So I think there's the theoretical base, there's the content and the accessibility, but it's also the people. How do you get access to people? I can learn more sitting down with Tim, like I did earlier this week or last week. Well, I think it was Tim when we caught up. In an hour's conversation, lifting from his experiences on Sydney Metro, than I can by sitting for an hour reading a brochure or a book or even an interpretation. So it's getting the collective knowledge and making sure that it keeps evolving through the stages.
Thanks, Graeme.
Yeah, I might jump in. So just focusing on what Graeme said then, change is a hard process, and focusing on making that change and having the perseverance to keep going. That's what's important to me. I think I might have a bit of an optimism bias, but we will drop the ball on the journey, but we shouldn't rely on that being the primary assumption. Let's rather allow it to be the exception. I was lucky enough to be in a panel a few weeks ago, and I made this comparison to a professional sports team. Well, let's say the Queensland Reds. I love rugby, and that's been a journey of optimism as well. No Queensland Red player goes into the dressing room before the game and plans on how they're going to drop the ball at kickoff, lose the scrum, then give away a penalty. They plan for how they'll be successful. And strategize their moves on how to get the ball out to the wing and score. That's what we need to do. We need to be the same. We need to plan for success. We need to allow for failure, but stick to the game plan. We need to be collaborative, communicate, and just deliver this together. And pursue our agenda. We're at the beginning of our journey, so I can afford to be optimistic. Call me in about a year and a half's time and see if we're still as happy. But the easy path is to revert to business as usual, how we always used to do it, how we delivered major projects. But change is more difficult, but it's worth it in the long run. And that's my message, I think.
Thanks, David.
Okay, well, I like Graeme. I think I've been involved in countless lessons learned processes, and I must admit, I find you get a lot more out of a conversation, pulling information and having that interaction than you do from reading countless reports. So I think creating those forums where you can actually have conversations is important. I think the other thing is that with all three areas, actually understanding what good looks like and where it's been done before, which is, again, we're an industry that we're non-believers, quite honestly, a bit like the Queensland Reds or the Waratah Blues. We know it is, but we don't really believe they'll ever perform this season. But when you see what can be achieved and you talk to those people, you think, oh, actually, I'll give that a go. And I think it gives you a level of confidence to actually understand. So if you know what good looks like, and I think Crossrail in the UK, they got a few things wrong, but they did an awful lot right. And I think certainly Australia, we benefited. We took their ideas, we changed them a bit. We had some ideas, Graeme's changed them a bit. I'm sure David's got some good ideas and he'll change them. And that's how we want to evolve, but you do need people that are willing to change. And I think that's important, willing to change, look at what success looks like. But as an industry, I think we do have to change. I think we talked about well-being earlier on. We create our own pressure in our industry. And if we don't change, there'll be a whole bunch of young, very, very bright people who will try and do something different rather than construction. And we actually need diversity, and we need young people to actually work in our industry, because we need the best minds and brains to deliver what we've got to deliver.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to thank the panel, and I'm going to hand back to Peter Colacino for some final closing words. Peter, you've got to put your mic on.
Oh, I apologise. I was just saying thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Tim Parker, David Watt, and Graeme Newton, but saying it to myself, unfortunately. So thank you for mentioning that, Jennifer. There's always one person who makes that terrible mistake. Can I say, though, listening to this conversation, reading this report, our roadmap and synthesis report, call to action for change in the sector, is only the first step. There, of course, is more that we can all do in order to be part of this change. And to pick up on that notion that Tim mentioned around finding people willing to be part of and to create the pressure for change in the sector and to drive the debate forward. Now, there have been more than 100 people participating in this session, and there are almost 100 more who've participated in workshops or signing on to the roadmap so far. So we have that nucleus for support in the sector to provide encouragement during the hard process that David mentioned, to acknowledge and overcome those challenges that could lay on the path to reform. So please, I encourage you to scan the QR code on your screen, sign on to the roadmap, and in fact, I also encourage you to join a working group and to be part of progressing the intellectual aspects of reform. Leaders within the sector have already been identified and signed on to the roadmap to be part of driving the change. And the first groups will convene over the next month. It's your opportunity to join with those leaders and to be part of, as Tim mentioned, encouraging the conversation and creating more conversations around the need to reform. You can also take action to develop a pilot, to even deploy a reform. And just as Graeme mentioned, it's that immediate change that's necessary in order to catalyse the broader sector to adopt reform, and not only implementing and adopting change, but also around reporting on and sharing the story's success or failure, as the roadmap has mentioned, that storytelling related to projects. But if you're uncertain of the next step, if you're uncertain of how to drive change, my encouragement is to contact the John Grill Institute for project leadership. Have a conversation with the team, with Jennifer, and with the other academics that are part of the Institute in order to connect with the University of Sydney, our partners, and indeed others who are driving change in the sector. You could host a researcher, provide a project case study, or help to fill a data or indeed a funding gap for critical research. The Major Project Leadership Forum will convene again over the next 12 months to manage progress or measure progress on some of the reforms that have been announced within the synthesis report, to see whether government, industry, and indeed others in the supply chain have adopted and driven change. So being part of adopting and implementing change, but also monitoring and reporting on progress, is a critical opportunity. And we look forward to the part that each and every one of you will play in making sure that the roadmap recommendations are adopted. Finally, in closing, can I just encourage you also to join us at the annual showcase event, which will be held on Wednesday, the 6th of November. The showcase is an in-person event held from 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. On the university's grounds. It's an opportunity to engage again with the roadmap and the Major Project Leadership Forum, as well as with our academics, and particularly early career academics who will share their research, their findings, their insights, and their own call for change. You'll also be able to receive an update following the launch today. For details, you can access them on, of course, the Institute's website, but also by emailing or even RSVPing if you're so inclined to john-grill.institute@sydney.edu.au. Thank you again for taking this time out of your busy days and perhaps away from a project in order to hear about these reforms and the opportunity within the sector. Thank you again to Jennifer, to David, Tim, and Graeme. I encourage you to stay in touch. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.